I used to do a lot of solo camping when I was younger. Back then, I worked a stressful office job, and disappearing into the woods for a few days felt like the only way to reset my brain. No phone service, no emails, no people. Just trees, silence, and a fire at night. Most of the time, it was peaceful. But there's one trip I still think about years later, and to this day, I can't fully explain what happened. This was about 6 years ago. I decided to spend a long weekend in a large national forest a few hours from where I lived. It wasn't a super popular area, and if you hiked far enough off the main trails, you could go days without seeing anyone. That was exactly what I wanted. I parked at a small gravel trailhead and started hiking around noon. The plan was simple: hike about 6 miles in, find the spot near water, set up camp, and stay for 2 nights. The hike itself was great. The weather was cool, the forest was quiet, and the trail gradually disappeared the deeper I went. Eventually, I left the marked path completely and followed a small creek that cut through a valley. Around late afternoon, I found the perfect spot to camp. There was a flat patch of ground beside the creek with a ring of tall trees around it. It felt secluded but safe. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and by sunset, I had a small fire going. The forest got incredibly dark once the sun went down. The tree canopy was so thick that even the moonlight barely made it through. I remember sitting by the fire, just listening to the creek and the occasional crack of burning wood. It was peaceful enough that I almost fell asleep sitting there. Eventually, I crawled into my tent and passed out. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. At first, I thought it was just one of those random wake-ups you sometimes get when you're sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. I lay there for a minute, staring at the inside of the tent, waiting to fall back asleep. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, but they were definitely footsteps. They sounded like someone walking slowly through leaves somewhere in the trees around my campsite. My first thought was that it was an animal. Deer move around at night all the time, and sometimes they sound surprisingly human when they step on dry leaves. But the longer I listened, the more wrong it felt. The footsteps had a rhythm to them. Step, pause, step, pause. Like someone carefully choosing where to place their feet. I slowly reached over and grabbed my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on yet. I just listened. The steps moved closer. I could hear them circling somewhere beyond the edge of my campsite, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. And then they stopped. Everything went completely quiet. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. About 10 seconds later, I heard something else. A single knock. It sounded like someone lightly tapping on a tree trunk. Just one knock, then silence again. My heart was racing at that point. I told myself it had to be an animal knocking against a tree or something random falling in the forest. But then it happened again. 2 knocks this time. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock. They came from a different direction, like whatever was out there had moved. And that was when I finally unzipped my tent and shined the flashlight out into the woods. The beam cut through the darkness and lit up the trees around my campsite. Nothing was there. No animals, no people, just trees and shadows. I sat there for a while scanning the forest, trying to calm myself down. After a few minutes of seeing nothing, I started to convince myself it had all been in my head. I zipped the tent closed and lay back down. Maybe 5 minutes passed. Then I heard the footsteps again. This time they were closer, way closer. They were right outside my campsite. Leaves crunching slowly, like someone walking in a circle around my tent. Step, pause, step, pause. I grabbed my flashlight again, and this time I swung the tent flap open immediately. The beam of light landed directly on a tree about 15 feet away. And that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a small pile of rocks at the base of the tree. That hadn't been there before. I knew it hadn't, because earlier that evening I had walked around that exact spot collecting firewood. The rocks were stacked in a rough little pyramid, maybe a foot tall. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I heard movement behind me, not far away. I spun the flashlight around toward the creek. For just a split second, the beam caught something between the trees. A person, or at least the shape of one, tall, standing completely still. The light only touched it for half a second before it disappeared behind the tree. But I know what I saw. Someone had been standing there watching me. Every instinct in my body told me to get out of there. I didn't even bother packing properly. I shoved my sleeping bag into my backpack, grabbed my headlamp, and started moving. I left the fire burning and the tent standing. I just needed distance. The forest felt completely different while I was hiking out in the dark. Every sound made me feel like something was right behind me. At one point, I stopped and turned off my headlamp just to listen. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps. Behind me. Farther away than before, but still following. I didn't stop again after that. I hiked through the rest of the night until I finally reached the trailhead around sunrise. My car was the only one in the parking lot. I drove straight home without sleeping. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that it had just been another camper messing with me. But the thing that still bothers me is the rock pile. Whoever built it would have had to walk directly into my campsite while I was asleep. And if they were willing to get that close without waking me, I still don't want to know how long they had been watching.